So there's a saying that when the dream is big enough, the facts don't count. Now, a typical example is an airplane getting in the air. I mean, who would have thought about the possibility of carrying so many people in the air? But the dream was, what if we could carry people in the air and transport them? So when the dream is big enough, you would find ways to make it happen. So in the same light, I decided, okay, I'm going to do this because it means more than just taking pictures for me. One is to change the idea of how people look at us. You know, perspective is everything, and imagery is everything. I bet the first time anybody wanted to travel was because of what they had seen. You know, when we're watching Hollywood movies, the first thing you see is a scene, a beautiful scene of a location, although it was so done quietly, very subliminal. But in the subconscious, we picked up, wow, you could see people back in the day swearing, man, as for America, no matter what I do, I'll go there. You know, you see a few things that wow you haven't seen before. Yeah. It was imagery. So I realized the power of images a long time ago, knowing what it could do. It's very tied to economics. Until you see that part, you just think of an image just as an image. You know, so promoting Ghana through imagery was how it started for me when it came to photography.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Against All Odds. My name is Daniel Coker, your regular host, and our guest this week is in the person of Mr. Yaw Pare. Did I pronounce that right?
Perfectly correct.
Okay, so Yaw is, among many things, a photojournalist, and he's renowned for having curated or put together the history of the forts and castles of Ghana, not just Ghana actually, around the West African coast.
No, actually it's a photo book, coffee table book of the forts and castles of Ghana.
Okay, yeah. So coffee table book of the forts and castles of Ghana.
Yeah.
And it details a very, very insightful history about our past, the slave trade, and basically the implications of the slave trade in the modern world. You know, so yeah, thank you very much for coming on our show.
Thank you for having me, Daniel. I appreciate it.
Fantastic. So let's just go a little bit into your background for context, because I know that you lived in the US for a while, and you're self-taught. You know, your photography, taking a photography was something that you came into almost by accident. You know, and you've taken that to a very high level. You've been involved in destination photography, you know, all across the world and all that. And you've built a reputation for yourself in that space. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, just for context? Before this episode starts, I'd like to ask a big favor. Your subscription means a lot to us, because the bigger this platform gets, the bigger the guests get. So do me a favor, please click on the subscribe button and the bell notification so that you don't miss out on any future episodes. Now let's get back to this episode.
Thanks again for having me, Daniel. Well, I lived in the States from 1994 to 2010, which was about 16 years, then came back to Ghana. Like you said, I got into photography by accident or happenstance because it wasn't something that I did before. I happened as a matter of seeing things and I'm like, this could be better than this, you know, it can be this way. And also the fact that photography tells a lot in one capture. You know, as the saying goes, an image speaks 1,000 words. So I felt it was a way that I could express what we have in Ghana to the world by just taking the pictures. So basically that's how it started. Yeah.
Okay, but then you didn't start with forts and castles. You started with people, like weddings and that aspect of things. And then at what stage did the forts and castles come in?
Well, even before the weddings and people, it started with landscape.
Okay.
So landscape was basically my thing of showcasing Ghana to the world in a different light. Okay, because what we see on media, mostly about Africa, is poverty, bad roads, bad neighborhoods, and stuff like that. I had to try my best to show the world that wasn't the case. So that's how it started. Now, I'll go further back. In 2006, this was right before the financial debacle in the US, as a matter of fact. My dad calls me and says, hey, Yaw, there's this property that you should look at. You know, it's going for this price, blah, blah, blah. You should take a look at it. I said, okay, cool. The first thing I did was go on Google. So when I went on Google to look up Ghana, like, oh, Ghana, this area, oh my God. The images that came, things about flooding, unkept places, that's all that was being showcased. So my thing was like, After fast forward 2010, I go back to Ghana. I was like, it's not really like that. Really, why are they showing this? Then I realized, okay, in my little bit, now, before I get to that my little bit part, a friend of mine, I started complaining, Ghana, this is bad. Everything, I was complaining about everything. And she said, okay, so all of you, this is what you do. You come, you complain, and you leave. Who should fix it for you to come and enjoy? I hate being challenged. So I was like, what are you saying? I mean, are you daring me or whatever? And mind you, I didn't have money at that time. So it's like, okay, what can I do different with the little that I have? My brother had this camera sitting in the corner of his room, basically growing fungus inside. I mean, it was a good camera, Canon 3D, which is rare. Sitting there, had a couple lenses. And when we are driving around, it's like, oh, I see this picture. Like, I can take a better. I think they could have done it this way. Mind you, I didn't even know how, a DSLR, which is the cameras we use, which is manually tuning the camera to take the pictures the way you want it to take. Manual. I used to use a point and shoot back in the day. So, now coming to take quality pictures with good pixelation require that you edit them and you take them in a way that you actually control the focus and all of that stuff. Aperture, ISO, and all of that stuff. I was like, no, that's not what I want, but I know it could be taken this way. So one, I had the eye for it.
Okay.
But not the technicalities of how it worked. But I was so determined. So I told my brother, I'll do it. And mind you, the fungus in the camera made it such a bad picture that when you take the picture, you see all these crawling like spider web in the image. So I had to force myself to learn how to remove those out of the image. And I have to turn the camera. So if I'm taking a shot at you, I have to look this way, like somebody who had, an eye. Cross eye. Yeah. So they were like, are you taking a picture? Like, I know what I'm doing, trust me. So it was just the top corner, right, that was clear. So that's how it began. And it was a dare that, okay, you come and you leave, we should fix it. And the other part was being determined based on what I felt like I could do regardless of my knowledge of it. Yes.
That's a very important point, actually, because it's all about starting where you are.
Exactly.
We started this podcast with the phone that I'm holding now.
Wow.
Okay, and a tripod. That's what I started with. Yes. And I've had people come to me, I want to start a podcast, I need money to buy a camera, I need money to buy these expensive, fancy microphones. Yeah. And we've had a sponsor who bought us a MacBook and all that. Thanks to Alexander Ash consulting professional. But you don't start that way. If you're waiting to have everything to start, you never start. You've got to start
where you are.
Tell us a bit more about that.
So there's a saying that when the dream is big enough, the facts don't count. Now, a typical example is an airplane getting in the air. I mean, who would have thought about the possibility of carrying so many people in the air? But the dream was, what if we could carry people in the air and transport them? So when the dream is big enough, you would find ways to make it happen. So in the same light, I decided, okay, I'm going to do this because it means more than just taking pictures for me. One is to change the idea of how people look at us. You know, perspective is everything, and imagery is everything. I bet the first time anybody wanted to travel was because of what they had seen. You know, when we're watching Hollywood movies, the first thing you see is a scene, a beautiful scene of a location. Yeah. Although it was so done quietly, very subliminal. But in the subconscious, we picked up, wow, you could see people back in the day swearing, man, as for America, no matter what I do, I'll go there. You know, you see a few things that wow you haven't seen before. Yeah. It was imagery. So I realized the power of images a long time ago, knowing what it could do. It's very tied to economics. Until you see that part, you just think of an image just as an image. You know, so promoting Ghana through imagery was how it started for me when it came to photography. Okay. And then it morphed into other things. Okay. Yeah.
Because I know you're one of the first. I mean, when in the past there have been other people who've done photo books of Ghana, not necessarily forts and castles. You focused on forts and castles, but then of Ghana, who are not from Africa. You know, but you seem to be one of the first people, indigenous people, who has chronicled, you know, the history of forts and castles. What was the fascination about the forts and castles?
Well, the forts and castles is very significant to our culture, and also people in the diaspora, a connection to the people in the diaspora from Africa. Okay. And for me to see that it wasn't chronicled in a way that actually would cause an attention to people kind of baffled me. That was one. The second part was it hadn't been put together, whereas it was on, you could find it anywhere. Now, the significance of this, if we can go back a little bit, you're talking about close to 12 million people survived through the transatlantic slave trade, through the forts and castles of Ghana and other forts in Africa to the diaspora. Now, think of how many people, after 400 years, the generations of African descendants that have come up in other places. Now, everybody wants to know where they came from. When we go back, I mean, you're asking your father a question, oh, so who's my dad? Who was your dad? Who was your dad? And who was his dad? You know, at the end of the day, you want to know where you're coming from. It's a point of strength. But to be in a place where you don't know where you came from and the story is being told in a way that you are not really in the know. The Africans that were transported through the transatlantic slave trade were enslaved. They weren't all slaves. They may have been slaves to certain kingdoms and stuff, but not all of them were slaves. Okay, some were enslaved. And they came from kingdoms that were very powerful. Knowing that alone can set you straight. To know that, okay, I'm from somewhere that I was brought here against my will, my great ancestry was brought here against their will. We need to know that. And how best can you do that is, for me, was showcasing these remnants of a haunted past to many. You know, the people who went through them, it wasn't a fort or a castle, it was a dungeon, you know, which most of it were. And for that trade to have gone on for close to 400 years, man, it's a shame that we're not talking about it like most of the genocides that has happened in the world. You know, it's something that to be talked about, is to be talked about to the point that we find out how to heal there's a lot of trauma that's happened through this. The people who participated, the people who were bystanders, it involves a lot. We need to come to a table, create a dialogue, and find ways and means to move forward. These forts and castles are places that you could create a pilgrimage for people who are in the diaspora to find a way to come back home where their ancestors left from and reconnect. Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned something which has got me a little bit confused. So some of the people who were transported were not enslaved.
Yeah, they weren't slaves. They were enslaved.
Okay, what does that mean? What's the distinction?
Okay, so there's a difference between when somebody's a slave, whereas, they were slaves of war or prisoners of war. Okay. Then a difference between people being captured and made into slaves and sold into slavery.
Okay.
So that's the difference. To be enslaved is to be forced into slavery. As a slave, you're already a slave to somebody. And even that, we had, indentured servitude, and we had slaves that were actually, let's say, from a family. They were not actually a slave. They were servants. We call them akwa in our language. Akwa could even marry from a family. They weren't slaves that were like, oh, you can't be part of us. You're racially looked at. There's a difference in that. And that's what people don't know. They think that, every one of them that came was a slave. No, that wasn't the case. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot for clarifying that. So, I mean, many people don't know this, but the royal family, the Church of England, the Bank of England were all complicit in the setting up of the transatlantic slave trade.
Yeah.
And what a lot of people, might think, that these boats were brought and these slaves were snatched. However, that's not quite the reality of what happened, because there must have been locals on the ground who brought their people, and offered them up to be sold. Yeah. So what could you tell us about, the dynamics of that trade?
Okay, so with regards to that, I'll go back to saying I'm not a historian, so I wouldn't know much of what really happened. But based on what I know, there was some complicity in terms of getting some of the people to the, to be enslaved.
Okay.
Okay, but it wasn't as if they knew that they were going to be going through the things that they went through, which we came to know after. So it was like, how we have, back in the days, you have a family member from Accra go to the village and bring somebody of a relative or even relatives' friends, say, oh, take my children back to Accra, for a better life. The difference is when they got to Accra or whatever, the treatment they have, that's a different story. But I think most of these people didn't mean it to be that way. But then there were others when it got to be a business, and they knew that, if somebody comes here and say, hey, fill my ship, but there's no more people, and I'll give you this. Some of them mostly wouldn't ask questions. They would just do it because business. Okay. And then it's till today. It happens, just that it's morphed into something different. I recently came from a conference on human rights and the legacies of slavery in Amsterdam. And one of the things that I found out after the event was there's more slavery that goes on today than what happened in the past.
Wow.
I was really dumbfounded. It's like, it's still prevalent till today. It's just the dynamics of it, may have changed a little bit. And that's where we find ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. So can you just tell our viewers a little bit about what it must have been like for somebody who had been transported to the point of, being put on the ship? Because I know those conditions were pretty harrowing. So can you give us a bit of context, our viewers a bit of context, who, might not be familiar with
that.
what, yeah.
So what I'm actually in the process of doing is a documentary, and it happens to be the story that's not been told much, which is from the north to the south, how they were captured from the capturers that sold to the middlemen, and middlemen to the slave masters. So it was a whole process,
the whole supply chain.
Yeah, supply chain. That how it happened. So if I came to you and said, okay, do you have any prisoners of war? I say, okay, yeah. How much you want for them? Oh, take them because I can't feed them, or this the price. So then brought to the next place, then to the next place. It's a story that is being researched, okay, but it's a story that is not being told, and hopefully we can get what we need to put it together and bring it out. Yeah.
Okay. Now, we've kind of moved into the realm of lots of countries crying out for reparations. I know the Caribbean are crying out for reparations, and are requiring the royal families and the current leaders of the royal families to apologize for the role that they played in the transatlantic slave trade. And I think Amsterdam the Netherlands has apologized, but the United Kingdom have refused to, they've stopped short of an apology. They just said the slave trade was abhorrent and all, they haven't really apologized. And I know the Caribbean are, as part of the Commonwealth, and they're crying out, so they actually want to be separate. I mean, what can you tell us a bit about that? What can you tell us about that? And whether there's a need for reparations, or should we just kind of move on and sweep it under the carpet?
Okay, well, it's the economics of it. Okay, one thing you have to know, if somebody says, I'm sorry for something, that means they are admitting guilt. And with admittance of guilt comes the cost, either by reparations or by stopping certain things that they keep doing. If you don't utter those words of apology, that means, okay, you are probably scared more of the consequences of that apology. Now, that's my definition of it. To me, there are two ways to look at reparations. One is the willingness of the person that is required to do the reparations. Okay, willingness to do it. Two, another way I look at it, and I think probably the best way. Reparations is going to cost quite a bit. And rightfully so, because based on the backs of these slaves were the reasons why most of these great countries are who they are. Imagine having free labor, okay, for centuries. Now, we talk about free labor for centuries. You don't have any rights to your human rights. So you work night and day at the beck and call of anyone who supersedes you as your superior till they have no need for you anymore. So it's now like the prison system where people work and they get pittance, work, what do you call it, a month and get $48, $50. Come on. Who wouldn't want that free labor? Okay. So in the reparation part where I think there has to be a different way of looking at it, especially for the Commonwealth countries and also for Africa, in my opinion. Well, I don't think we're getting reparations, they are, is to stop mingling in the ways that they make money. If you don't want to give reparations, stop mingling in the way that they thrive. We've seen so many times in many African American little towns that were completely destroyed because they had become so much self-sustainable and was making so much advances in terms of creating generational wealth. Now, when somebody that you refuse to pay reparations to now gets to the point where they stand on their own and become self-sufficient and don't need you, and you come to destroy that and still walk away with that. In that very sense, slavery hasn't stopped. The concept of it is still prevalent till this day. and it still perpetuates because they are not making rules or policies to essentially end it. Because there is the need for the continuance of it, maybe not shackled, but in another way, taking away your privileges and your right to become self-sustainable, because it is detrimental to the ones that suppress you.
Okay, so just two more questions before we wrap up. The issue of reparations, right? You know, lots of African countries have a reputation for corruption. Okay, so even if there are reparations, will this money benefit the people or the descendants of the people who were trafficked as slaves?
Yeah. So let me correct one thing here. Corruption in Africa is actually supported by the Western powers. This may be a very profound statement, but it's true. There's this document that I encourage everybody who maybe haven't seen it to see it. Is John Perkins' book on the Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
Yeah, I read it. Yeah.
Now, if you know and have read that, they don't want the right presidents or leaders to be in play. Kwame Nkrumah was assassinated or killed in a way, not assassinated, but gotten rid of in a way because he was becoming too powerful for the West. Mm-hmm. They don't need the right leaders to be in place. Corruption is good for the West because that's how come they can have a foothold in the countries that they want to keep under their thumb. So that's the correction there. So if reparations were given to places, whereas when Gaddafi was in power, when all the right Sankara, the Kwame Nkrumahs were in place, and this reparation was given, right? It would go to do what it needs to do. So in the same way the reparations is not being given, is the same way they want to keep the corruption going on. And that's my opinion. Yeah, this is not coming from anybody. Yeah, my opinion is based on how I see it and how I know it's being done.
Okay. And then and finally as well, I mean, I know you talk about the fact that these days people don't come shackled, but then it's well documented that lots of developed countries like the United Kingdom are recruiting heavily from the health professionals in Commonwealth countries with the promise of a better life, and these will turn up here in other parts of the world and they find out they are paid way far less than their British contemporaries or whatever contemporaries. Yeah. They can barely survive. They can never climb up the ladder. They can barely even rent a place to live. So they're put in these shared houses, shared accommodations, whatever it is. And they're trapped because they left the shores of Africa in search of a better life. Yeah. They've come and tasted a little bit of it, but they're stuck.
No, yeah.
What can you tell us about that?
This goes back again to the power of imagery. Okay. So based on what people, what the West wants you to believe is what is pushed down your throat. And so you see, oh man, I can't wait. And you are comparing the pounds to the CD and knowing how much you're going to be making. But one thing we forget is not how much you make in life, it's how much you keep. Okay, so if you're making 100,000 and you end up keeping $2, and the shoemaker ends up keeping $500 at the end of the year, and he makes 10,000, who is richer? That ideology in the mind has to be rebranded, So they are painting this picture, and that's how come you get a lot of people to gravitate to it. That's the new form of slavery. We're not shackling you, but we're going to control how you think. And how you think, there's a saying that give me the steering wheel to a man, and that's all I need. Because in that way I can control him, steer him any which way to go. So with people coming here, then finding out in a surprising way, and at the same time ashamed to go back and say, hey man, it wasn't as promised, is because they were lied to. And I bet you it's the same way that people got lied to in the past to get on the slave boats and say, oh, it's just a journey or whatever, or something. Then later you see yourself shackled and it's too late to go back. It's the same thing replaying itself in a different manner, but maybe this time, hey, you'll be in a cubicle instead of a dungeon. It's the same way. And the brain drain. There's one thing I'll add to that. Back in the days when we were growing up and you hear somebody, oh, my son has gotten a scholarship. I'm so proud and I'm so happy. And they whisk him away. Of course, he's smart. He's going to make things better for another country, but not you. Maybe one family will benefit instead of us a whole country. So that's the true identity of brain drain. Taking out people who are smarter and taking them to another country. Of course, this should tell you the true selfishness of us as a people. Is a matter of self-preservation. So, hey, man, I'll go, I'll make a better living and, I'll send something home. Okay. And, oh man, I was listening to this thing this morning, I think, or yesterday. Somebody was playing it out. Showcasing, I think I was talking to a friend on this matter, and it was how you have to sacrifice your life and beg to come to a place that is still going to use you till there's nothing left, and when there's nothing left, they let you go. And traveling, oh, we need your ID, we need this, blood sample, if you may add, hair sample, all of that, making it so difficult. But it's the idea. They've got in our mind so bad. It's so hard to get out of this trap and make you believe that the harder it is, the best. Meanwhile, it's a trap. You can't pay me to live anywhere but Ghana. Trust you me. It's coming to that identity of who we are and knowing what you have. That's why I keep posting images of Ghana. Know what you have. If you don't know what you have, how do you promote it? How do you value it? How do you monetize it? How do you franchise it? We don't know what we have. Here we have land that you can just throw the seeds of tomatoes and within 3 days it's growing naturally, organically. But we are forced to come to places where everything is controlled. Your food, the seeds don't even come when the fruit's there. Because somebody wants to control how it's grown. And if somebody controls what you eat, you're doomed.
They're controlling you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Oh, thank you very much. Anyway, so you have these
puzzles.
Yes. Is this something you did yourself? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
So yes. This is
a bit about it, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. This is what do you call it? Keiko's Castle. Yeah. It's a 1,000-piece puzzle, and I made it under the brand name Ebusiapa, which will be having a festival every year called the Ebusiapa Heritage Festival in Ghana, in partnership with Access Bank, of course, and we'll be doing games that are made by us. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. And this as well is a different kind.
This is a different one. It's different. What do you call it? Puzzles. I have about 20 different pieces to choose from, promoting the culture and heritage of Ghana. Okay. Yeah.
And then also your book. Where can people watching this get copies of your book?
So I have my books in England, the Erith Museum. You can go there online and place your orders from there. But besides that, you can go to yawpareimages.com if you're in Ghana, or go to Amazon and look for Remnants of a Haunted Past on Amazon in the US. That's if you're there.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much for your time. Before you go, we have a tradition on this podcast where we give our guests the chance to say a thank you or to dedicate the episodes they feature on to anyone or any group of people of their choice. So who would you like to dedicate this episode to? And you're more than happy to look in the camera.
Wow. I think I'll dedicate this episode to Ghana and the people of Ghana. And of course, today happens to be Independence Day, if I may say that. Right?
Yeah.
So, to the people of Ghana, this is for you. I hope we can put ourselves out there and become the nation that has been the place to look to when you're coming to Africa and open more doors for others. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Yaw. And I'd also like to say a very big thank you to our sponsors, Alexander Ash Consulting and Consulting Professionals Limited, for your continued support and for making this happen. And on that note, I'd like you to like this video if you've enjoyed it, comment, share, and subscribe, and help us to build a platform where we can showcase the achievements of people like Yaw. And thank you very much, and see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Done.